I can still smell that stale bread, as if the wind of that cold night brought it back, along with everything that happened afterward. It was the end of November, and the Chicago cold seemed to cut right to the soul. People hurried past, wearing expensive coats, while I tried to warm my hands by blowing the icy air on them. That night seemed like just another one, but I never imagined it would be the beginning of the greatest miracle of my life. I remember finding a piece of bread at the bottom of a crumpled bag, a hard loaf, but to me it was like a feast. I carefully kept it because I knew it might be the only thing I would have to eat that day. I had no roof over my head, I had no one, and yet, inside me, there was something I never managed to lose, the faith that God still saw me. That's when I saw him. A man sitting on the sidewalk across the street, huddled up, covered by a dirty, torn blanket. His face was pale, his gaze distant, as if he had already given up on the world. And, for some reason I still don't understand, my heart beat differently at that moment. I felt something pushing me from within. A soft, almost silent voice said, "Go." I hesitated. How could I give away the little I had? That loaf of bread was everything. But the man's gaze seemed to cry out for help. And something inside me knew that if I ignored it, I would be losing more than just a piece of bread. I gripped the bread tightly in my hands and crossed the street. The snow began to fall, fine and light, as if the sky were crying along with me. And there, before it, I didn't know that my life was about to change forever. The wind blew through the deserted streets, lifting papers and dry leaves that danced around my feet. I pulled the grimy blanket up to my chin, trying to hold back some warmth. The city lights shone in the distance, but none of them seemed to reach the alley where I hid. It was like living in a forgotten corner of the world, where no one else looked. That night, the smell of warm bread wafting from a nearby bakery reminded me of my childhood. Of the time when my mother was still alive and baked bread every Sunday. I would close my eyes and almost hear her voice softly singing hymns, saying that God always provides, even when everything seems lacking. Before continuing, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, because we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, because His love is eternal and infinite. I also take this opportunity to ask you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. I opened my eyes again and stared at that small piece of bread I had kept in my pocket. It was the last one. And, even though it was hard, it seemed like the most precious treasure in the world. I held it tenderly, almost afraid to eat it and be left with nothing. My stomach ached, but my heart ached even more. I watched the people walk by. No one looked at me. It was as if I were invisible. Sometimes I wondered if God still knew my name. But then I heard a faint moan coming from the other sidewalk, and something inside me awakened. That man looked worse than I did. He had a vacant stare, and his hands were trembling. He was wearing a torn coat and clutching an old bag to his chest. For a moment, I thought of pretending not to see, but the Holy Spirit stopped me. It was as if someone held me by the heart and said, "Give what you have." I stood up slowly. My bare feet touched the icy ground, and I felt every stone, every grain of ice sinking between my toes. I looked at the bread again. A small, hard piece, but one that could mean a less painful night. I sighed deeply and started to cross the street. The snow was falling in larger flakes now, and the wind seemed to push my body back, as if it wanted to stop me. But I kept going. Every step was a struggle. Every breath of air hurt my lungs. And yet, something inside me told me I needed to reach him. When I stopped in front of the man, he slowly looked up. His eyes were full of tears, and there was something about them that frightened me, a mixture of shame and despair. I held out the bread with trembling hands and said, my voice almost fading away, "Take it. It's all I have." He stared at me, in disbelief. For a moment, I thought he was going to refuse. But then he held the bread, with such care that it seemed as if he were touching a miracle. I saw a tear roll down his cheek, and I felt a lump in my throat. "Why are you giving me this?" he asked, his voice hoarse and tired. I just shrugged. "Because God doesn't let me keep what I can share." He lowered his head and remained silent. For a few seconds, we stood there, under the snow, sharing the most beautiful silence I've ever experienced. I watched him take his first bite, and at that moment, I swear I felt warmth in my chest. as if the sky had opened just for the two of us. He tried to give me half back, but I refused. I told him to keep it all, and offered him my torn blanket. He protested, but I insisted. "I'm used to the cold," I lied. In truth, I just didn't want him to die that night. The rain began to thicken, mingling with the snow. We sat side by side, sharing short stories, vague memories. He said his name was Henry, and that he had once had a good life, but had lost everything. He didn't want to explain much, and I didn't ask. Deep down, I felt there was something hidden behind those eyes. Something he wasn't ready to say. But at that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had some bread in his stomach, and I had a new reason to believe that God was still at work. The hours passed slowly. The city seemed asleep. I leaned my head against the wall, and for a moment, I let myself rest. The sound of Henry's breathing made me feel less alone. It was strange, but comforting. When I opened my eyes again, the sun was already beginning to rise, timidly peeking through the clouds. The seat next to me was empty. Henry had disappeared. No sign of him. But where he had slept, I found something glistening on the ground, an ancient golden coin, unlike anything I had ever seen. I picked it up carefully, and at that instant, a strange sensation ran through my body, as if that coin held a secret. I looked around, searching for him. Nothing. Only the distant sound of cars and the song of a lost bird. And in that silence, something inside me told me that this wouldn't be the last time I heard about Henry. Because there was something different about that coin. And, somehow I couldn't explain, it seemed to shine brighter every time I thought of his name. I didn't know it, but that small gesture, giving away my last loaf of bread, was about to change everything. That morning, the Chicago sky seemed grayer than ever. I still held the coin in my hands, trying to understand why it made me so uneasy. It was heavy, cold, with an ancient sheen that seemed to hold a story. There was something sacred about that object, something that made me feel watched, but not with fear, rather with a kind of hope I couldn't explain. The wind cut my face, and I pulled the blanket up to my shoulders. The alley where I slept began to fill with noise, cars, footsteps, horns, the sound of the city waking up. And there I was, lost among tall buildings, trying to find meaning in yet another day. My stomach rumbled. My body ached. But inside my chest there was a strange peace, as if something great was about to happen. I put the coin in my pocket and decided to walk. Every time I moved, the loneliness seemed to hurt less. I passed the corner bakery, the same place where the smell of fresh bread had wafted from the night before. The baker, a kind man named Mr. Davis, he gave me a cup of weak coffee and a smile. "God bless you, Naomi," he said, and I felt like crying. As I walked, I noticed something different. People were looking at me strangely, not with disdain, but with curiosity. I didn't understand why. Until I noticed a car parked across the street, a black sedan, too clean for that forgotten neighborhood. Inside, someone was watching me. My heart raced. Was he a police officer? Or someone from social services trying to get me out of there? I'd run away from shelters before because I couldn't stand the pitying looks, the cold rules, the noise of the fights. But that car didn't seem to belong to anyone I knew. I tried to pretend I didn't see him and kept walking. The streets were damp, and the puddles reflected the skyscrapers like broken mirrors. I looked down, trying to avoid the driver's gaze, but the feeling of being followed grew with each step. Something told me that this day wouldn't be like any other. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a door opening. I turned slowly. A tall man in a suit got out of the car. He seemed out of place in that neighborhood. His shoes gleamed, his posture was firm, his gaze serious. He crossed the street toward me, and I instinctively took 2 steps back. "Are you Naomi?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I froze. No one had called my name in a long time. I swallowed hard before answering. "Yes, I am. Who wants to know?" He smiled slightly. "My name is Robert. Someone sent me to find you." For a moment, I thought it was some cruel joke. But his gaze was sincere, almost respectful. "You sent someone to meet me?" "Who?" I asked. He paused before answering. "A man named Henry." My heart froze. That didn't make sense. I blinked several times, thinking I hadn't heard right. Henry. The same man I'd helped the night before? The one who could barely stand? Henry, I repeated, my voice trembling. But he's disappeared. Where is he? Robert took a deep breath. He's fine. And he asked me to take you to him. The words sounded so absurd that I laughed nervously. Is this a joke? He could barely walk yesterday. What do you mean, take me to him? Robert just smiled. You'll understand. I looked around, trying to find some way out, some sign that this was real. People hurried past, indifferent, as always. And there I was, a homeless girl, being invited into a luxury car by a stranger who claimed to know a man who, until yesterday, slept on the ground. Inside, something told me to run. But another, deeper feeling pushed me forward. It was the same feeling I had the night before, when I crossed the street with the bread in my hands. That gentle voice, which I could only call God, told me, trust. With sweaty palms, I held the coin in my pocket and nodded. Okay, I'll go. Robert opened the car door gently, as if he were welcoming a lady. I got in slowly, inhaling the scent of new leather and expensive cologne. It was like being in another world. The door closed, and the city noise disappeared. The silence inside the car was almost sacred. I looked out the window as the car began to move, and realized we were heading downtown, where the buildings touched the sky. I had never been this far. During the drive, Robert kept his eyes on the road, and I couldn't stop asking questions. How is he? What happened after I left? But he just kept saying, you'll see for yourself. That made me even more anxious. My thoughts were jumbled. What if it was a trap? What if Henry was lying about who he was? I'd seen people take advantage of others' kindness before. But there was something different in this case. Something spiritual. We passed through streets I only knew by name, Michigan Avenue, Wabash, Dearborn. Every corner seemed to remind me how small I was in that enormous world. And yet, I felt that God was taking me somewhere for a reason. When the car stopped, I looked out the window and gasped. We were standing before a huge building, with white columns and gilded windows. At the entrance, 2 flags fluttered in the wind. A man in uniform opened the gate, and I realized this was a luxury hotel. Robert went out first and offered me his hand. I hesitated before accepting it. My clothes were dirty, my nails broken, my hair tangled. I felt out of place, a stranger in forbidden territory. He's inside, he said, with a calm look. We went inside. The lobby was so beautiful I could barely stand. The marble floor reflected the golden lights, and the sound of a piano played in the background. People glanced discreetly at me, some with curiosity, others with astonishment. But, strangely, no one stopped me from continuing. Robert led me to a mirrored elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The sound of the doors closing echoed in my ears. As we ascended, my heart pounded. I gripped the coin in my pocket so tightly I almost hurt my palm. When the doors opened, the hallway was silent and covered with a red carpet. At the end of it, a double door of dark wood awaited. Robert stopped before it and looked at me. He's in there. My whole body was trembling. With each step, I remembered the hoarse voice, the tired eyes, the bread being divided in the rain. I took a deep breath and touched the doorknob. The door opened slowly, and what I saw on the other side made my legs weak. It was him, Henry, but not the same man from the night before. His face was clean-shaven, his hair combed, and he wore an elegant gray suit. Behind him, a glass wall offered a view of the entire city. He smiled. I told you we'd see each other again, Naomi. My heart stopped for a second. Everything around me seemed to disappear. And in that instant, I realized that destiny was only beginning to reveal its mystery. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The man before me didn't seem like the same Henry I'd found on the Cold Street floor. It was as if someone had taken away all his pain, all his filth, all his shame. He seemed different, more alive, stronger, and yet, his eyes were the same, deep and full of something I couldn't decipher. "Come in, Naomi," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips sent shivers down my spine. I entered slowly, afraid of staining the polished white floor with my worn shoes. He noticed and smiled tenderly. "Don't worry about that. No one judges anyone here." That phrase kept hammering inside me. Nobody judges anybody. I looked around, the luxury, the silence, the fresh flowers in crystal vases, and thought, what could a man like that possibly want from someone like me? "You must be wondering why you're here," he continued, walking to a huge glass window. "The truth is, I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you did last night." His voice sounded calm, but there was something trembling in it, as if he was still trying to process it all. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there watching the city below, the lights, the movement, the contrast between that world and mine. Finally, I managed to murmur, "I only did what anyone would do." He turned to me and replied, "No, Naomi. People don't do that. Not anymore." For a moment, silence filled the room. I felt the weight of his words, and also the weight of his gaze. He seemed to see beyond my clothes, my appearance, as if he could see directly into my soul. "When you gave me that bread, I was ready to give up," he said, looking at the ground. "But you gave me more than food. You gave me faith." Those words hit me hard. Faith. A word I held tightly to every day, like someone protecting a flame about to go out. "Faith is all we have when everything else disappears," I replied softly. He nodded. Henry went to a small table and picked up 2 cups of steaming tea. He offered me one. I accepted, feeling the warmth on my fingers. "Sit with me, please." I sat down, wary but curious. There was something different in the air, as if destiny was preparing something much bigger. "I've lived a life that many people call perfect," he began, stirring his tea. "Money, house, family. But sometimes, God needs to take everything away from us to show us what really matters." I didn't say anything. I just listened to him in silence as the rain began to beat against the window. That rain seemed to speak to us. Each drop fell like a divine whisper, reminding us that life can change in the blink of an eye. Henry took a deep breath and continued, "Yesterday I left home to end it all. I was going to throw myself off the bridge. My body went cold." He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the cup. "But then you appeared. A thin girl, cold, with nothing. And yet, you gave me what you held most precious." My heart was racing. I didn't know what to say. I had never imagined that that simple piece of bread could have saved a life. "God sent me to you," I said without thinking. He looked up and smiled. "I believe that." Silence returned, but this time it was a light, almost sacred silence. Outside, the sound of the rain grew louder, and I remembered the previous night. I remembered the snow, the cold, my trembling hands. And now, here we were, 2 survivors of the same miracle. He stood up and walked to a shelf full of books. He took out a small wooden box. "I want to show you something." He placed the box on the table and opened it slowly. Inside, there were dozens of coins identical to the one he had left with me. My eyes widened. "These coins. You left one with me." He nodded. "They're old. They belonged to my grandfather. He used to say that each coin represented an act of kindness that the world needed to see." I took one. It was identical to mine. Cold, golden, mysterious. "Why did you give me one?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "Because what you did was the greatest act of kindness I've ever received. And because this coin, Naomi, is the symbol of a promise." "A promise?" I asked, confused. He looked intently into my eyes. "The promise that if I ever found someone who made me believe again, I would change everything. Absolutely everything." There was something in his voice that made me believe. It wasn't arrogance. It was truth. I felt it. "But why me?" I asked. "Because God chose you to remind me of what I've forgotten." I was speechless. That man, so powerful, so different from me, now spoke with a humility that broke down any distance. "Do you believe in destiny, Naomi?" I smiled, tired. "After everything I've been through, I think all I can do is believe." He chuckled softly. "So, what if I told you that fate is about to change again?" Before I could answer, he stepped closer, picked up an envelope from the table, and placed it before me. "This is for you." I stared at the envelope, startled. "What is this?" "Open it," he said. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a gleaming silver key. "This is the key to a new house." "Your house?" My heart stopped for a moment. "What? You can't do that." He smiled. "I can, and I already have." I stood up, confused, nervous. "I don't deserve this." He came closer and replied firmly, "You deserve everything that love can give you." Tears came before I could hold them back. "Why? Why are you doing this?" Henry sighed and looked out the window. The rain was now falling heavily, pounding against the glass as if it wanted to get inside. "Because I need redemption too." At that moment, the sound of the rain grew louder, like a celestial choir. He turned to me, and in his eyes there was a secret, something he wasn't yet ready to reveal. "But before you accept this gift, Naomi, there's something you need to know." My heart raced. The air felt heavier. "What is it, Henry?" I asked, almost voiceless. He took a deep breath, hesitating. Then, before he could answer, a thunderclap ripped through the sky and the lights in the room went out. Everything went dark. The storm raged outside. And in that absolute darkness, I heard only his voice, low, almost a whisper. "You don't know who I really am." The silence that followed was more deafening than the thunder. When the light went out, for a moment, all I heard was the sound of my own heart. The storm raged outside, and the wind made the windows tremble. I called his name, "Henry," but there was no answer. The room seemed plunged into a vivid, almost conscious darkness. I groped around, trying to find any sign of him. Nothing. Just the strong smell of rain and the sound of water running down the glass. I lit the old flashlight from my pocket, and the weak beam of light traveled across the floor until it stopped on something glistening, the coin. The same coin. She was in the same spot where Henry had stood minutes before. Cold, golden, imposing. I picked her up, feeling a pang in my chest. It was as if God were telling me something I wasn't ready to understand yet. Where was he? I ran to the window, but the city outside was shrouded in the storm. Lightning streaked across the sky, reflecting off the glass like camera flashes. No sign of Henry. No movement. Only the distant sound of sirens echoing through the wet streets. "Henry!" I shouted again. No answer. I opened the door, went out into the hallway, looked for Robert, the driver, but the whole floor seemed empty. This was impossible. I didn't know if I was dreaming or trapped in some kind of divine nightmare. I ran down the stairs, calling for him, until I reached the lobby. The employees looked at me, startled and confused by my presence. "Mr. Henry Collins, have you seen him?" I asked. The receptionist stared at me in astonishment. "Who?" "Henry Collins," I repeated. "He's staying here, on the top floor." She frowned. "Ma'am, we don't have anyone registered with that name." For a second, I thought I hadn't heard right. My whole body froze. "What do you mean?" She typed something into the computer and shook her head. "There's no record of anything, no recent reservations. The last guest on the top floor left the hotel weeks ago." I stood there, speechless, the coin clutched in my palm. I staggered out of the hotel. The rain was pouring down, and the wind was pushing me backward. I looked up, trying to understand what was happening. Could it all have been an illusion? The streets were almost deserted, except for a few cars passing by. I sat on the sidewalk, my clothes soaked and my heart pounding. The coin still gleamed between my fingers, as if mocking my confusion. "God, what's happening?" I murmured. And it was at that moment that a memory flooded my mind. Henry's gaze the night I met him. That sadness, that weight. The way he held the bag against his chest, as if hiding something. It wasn't just hunger. It was guilt. I closed my eyes, trying to piece things together. He had said, "You don't know who I really am." The words echoed like a warning, a key I didn't yet know how to use. But what if he had left because of that? What if he was running away from something, or someone? The rain was lessening, and the city seemed to breathe again. I got up slowly, looked around, and noticed something strange. A black car parked on the corner, the same one from before. Only now, it was empty. The engine was off. The door was ajar. I went over there, hesitant. Inside, there was a wet envelope on the passenger seat, with my name handwritten on it. Trembling, I opened the paper. Inside, a folded sheet of paper with firm lettering, "Trust in God, and follow what is inside." At the bottom of the envelope was a key, identical to the one he had given me, but with a number engraved on it, 207, and an address, Collins Shelter, West Madison Street. I had never heard of that place, but something told me that was where I should go. I put the envelope away and started walking. The streets were still damp, reflecting the streetlights. The cold bit, but my curiosity burned even stronger. Each step seemed to bring me closer to an answer, or a new mystery. I arrived at the address almost an hour later. It was an old building, made of reddish bricks, with a faded sign. Collins Shelter. The windows were dark, and the front door was locked. I used the key. The lock yielded with a soft click. Inside, the air was thick, smelling of mold and memories. I walked through the dusty corridors, illuminating the path with my flashlight. On the floor, old, yellowed photos, torn documents, and a fallen plaque with the name, "Founded in 1998 by Henry Collins." My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. So that was it. Henry had a shelter. A place he had created and abandoned. I ran my fingers over the sign, feeling the cold letters. "Who are you, Henry?" I whispered. I heard a noise behind me and turned around quickly. Nothing. Just the echo of the wind coming through a broken window. I walked to a table at the back of the room. There was an open Bible on it, and an unlit candle beside it. I brought the flashlight closer and saw that a passage was underlined, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink." Matthew 25 verse 35. My hands began to tremble. Henry had left that for me. I felt the tears welling up, warm, mingling with the coldness of my face. Everything made sense, and at the same time, nothing did. It was as if he were trying to teach me something I didn't yet understand. Something about giving, about faith, about starting over. Then I heard footsteps. Again. This time, slow, steady, coming from the hallway. My whole body froze. "Is anyone there?" I asked, my voice trembling. No answer. The flashlight began to flicker. I took 2 steps back, leaning against the wall. The sound of the footsteps grew closer, until it stopped behind the door. Silence. And then, a sharp knock. Just one. My heart seemed to beat in time with that sound. "Henry," I whispered. But all that came in response was the creak of the door opening slowly on its own, as if moved by an invisible force. Behind her, the dark corridor stretched like an endless tunnel. And at the very end, something was shining. It was the same golden light as the coin. I swallowed hard and took a step forward. The ground creaked beneath my feet. And, for the first time, I was afraid. Afraid of what I might find, and afraid of what God was about to show me. Because deep down, I already knew, Henry hadn't disappeared by accident. That night, I could barely sleep. The glow of that golden light at the end of the hallway wouldn't leave me in peace. I closed my eyes, but I saw the image repeating itself, insistently, as if God were trying to tell me something, and I still didn't have the courage to listen. Dawn broke slowly. The shelter seemed colder, quieter, as if the walls held ancient secrets. I ran my hand over the open Bible on the table, trying to find solace. The words seemed to whisper within me, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." I decided to go out. I walked through the wet streets, my clothes still damp from the previous night's rain. The envelope with the address and the key were tucked away in my pocket, like amulets of faith. Each step echoed between the buildings, and the city seemed to watch me. I arrived at the spot where I used to sleep. The alley was empty, the ground covered with old newspapers. I sat for a moment, watching the people hurry by. It was curious how, even after everything I had been through, that was the only place where I felt at home. I picked up the coin and held it between my fingers. The rising sun reflected on it, casting a soft glow on the ground. I closed my eyes and said a silent prayer. "Lord, if all this comes from you, show me the way. Show me what Henry wanted me to see." It was at that moment that I heard the sound of an engine approaching. I looked up and saw a black limousine, the same one that had taken me to the hotel, parking on the corner. My heart froze. The driver got out, wearing the same dark suit, and walked towards me. "Miss Naomi?" he asked, in the same calm voice. "Yes, that's me," I replied, standing up slowly. He opened the car door and said, "Someone wants to speak with you." My body froze. "Henry?" I asked. He just smiled. "Please get in." I got into the car with my heart racing. The smell of leather and expensive perfume hit me again, and the memory of the hotel came back like a flash. But this time, the air felt different, more tense, colder. The door closed, and the driver started the car without saying a word. The streets of Chicago rushed past the window, but I didn't recognize the road. "Where are we going?" I asked. He simply replied, "You'll understand soon." The silence inside the car was almost suffocating. I clutched the coin in my hands, trying to feel safe. Memories of the previous night came like waves, the shelter, the Bible, the golden light. It was as if everything was about to connect. After a few minutes, the car stopped. I looked out the window and froze. We were standing before an immense mansion, surrounded by iron gates and impeccable gardens. On the gate, a golden plaque, Collins Estate. My heart skipped a beat. His last name. "Henry," I murmured, without realizing it. The driver opened the door and gestured for me to get out. "He's waiting for you." I climbed the marble stairs, my legs trembling. Each step sounded too loud, as if echoing deep within my soul. The main door opened by itself, and a woman in uniform appeared. "Miss Naomi, please follow me." I entered the house, and the air inside felt like another world, the scent of flowers, the distant sound of a piano, and a gentle warmth that reminded me of my mother's house. We walked down a long hallway to a huge room filled with old paintings. That's when I saw it. In the center of the wall, a huge portrait, and in it, Henry's face. Young, smiling, with a woman and a child beside him. The woman had kind eyes, and the boy held a gold coin. "My God!" I whispered, touching the frame. The employee watched in silence. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice trembling. "In the office, miss," she replied, indicating a door at the back. I approached slowly, and before I could knock, the door opened by itself. The smell of fresh coffee enveloped me. Inside, a lit fireplace illuminated the room. But Henry wasn't there. In its place, there was an envelope on the table. My name was written in the same firm handwriting. I picked it up carefully, feeling my heart clench. Inside, there was a letter. "Naomi, if you're reading this, it's because I needed to step away. There's something you don't know about me yet, something that will change everything you think. Follow the address on the back of this letter. There, you will find what I left for you, and perhaps answers that I was never able to give." I turned the paper over. Another address, this time in a neighborhood far from the city. And, attached to the letter, another object, a necklace with a silver cross. On the back of the cross, the words were engraved, "Faith restores all." I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was all too symbolic to be a coincidence. Henry hadn't just disappeared, he was guiding me. As if he wanted me to follow a trail he had deliberately left behind. I looked around and noticed something that took my breath away. On the wall, behind the desk, there was an old painting, the same golden light I had seen in the shelter. The same glow, the same colors. As if the artist had seen what I had seen. I approached, fascinated. The signature in the lower corner made me freeze. Henry J. Collins, 1998, he was the author. Henry had painted that picture decades ago, long before I was born. The tears came without warning. I didn't know what was more impossible, the fact that he had foreseen all of this, or that God was guiding me through these signs. "Why me, Lord?" I murmured, kneeling before the fireplace. As I was praying, a sound made me lift my head. The clock in the room showed noon, but the hand was spinning rapidly, uncontrollably, as if time had gone mad. Then, suddenly, it stopped. And at that instant, I heard a knock on the front door. The clerk rushed to attend to me. I stood there, motionless. Minutes later, she returned, pale, almost voiceless. "Miss Naomi, there's someone here to see you." "Who?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "A man who says his name is Henry." My heart skipped a beat. "Henry?" She nodded, still trembling. "But he is different." Before I could react, I heard footsteps approaching. Slow. Loud. I recognized the sound even before I saw it. The door to the room opened. And there he was, but not as before. The gray suit had been replaced by simple clothes, his hair wet from the rain. He looked at me silently, his eyes filled with something between regret and faith. "Naomi," he said, his voice hoarse, "the time has come for you to know the whole truth." And at that moment, I felt that the first major turning point in my life had just begun. When I saw Henry standing at the door, I felt as if the world had stopped spinning. He seemed like a different person, neither the rich man in the suit, nor the beggar on the sidewalk. Something in his gaze had changed. He carried the serenity of someone who had crossed through hell and found God on the other side. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. The words were lost in my throat. I just watched him approach, the sound of his footsteps echoing across the wooden floor. When I finally managed to speak, my voice trembled. "Why did you do this to me?" He stopped in front of me, his face illuminated by the soft light of the fireplace. "Because I needed to be sure that you believed, Naomi. That you believed in something greater than what you saw." I frowned, confused. "Believe in what?" Henry took another step closer, and the fire reflected in his eyes. "In miracles." Those two words hung in the air like an ancient secret. I felt my heart clench. "You disappeared. You left me lost. I thought you were dead." "I know," he replied, his voice breaking. "And forgive me for that. But I needed to disappear to understand what was really happening to me." He ran a hand over his face, as if carrying the weight of a lifetime. "I also needed to be found." We were silent for a few seconds. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sound of the wind hitting the windows was like a distant whisper. I watched him, trying to understand. "You're not okay, Henry. You're hiding something." He looked away. He walked to the window and gazed at the city. "Remember the shelter you went to? The Collins shelter." I nodded. That place was my heart. And it was there that I lost everything. I sat down slowly on the sofa. He began to speak, and his voice was almost a confession. "That shelter was the first project I created when I was young. I wanted to help homeless people, people like you. But over time, I lost focus. I started using God's name as a shield for my own vanity." He turned to me, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "And then came the tragedy. A fire. A short circuit on a cold winter night. Almost everyone survived, except my wife. I felt my body go cold." "My God, Henry!" he nodded, unable to look at me. "She was there helping the volunteers." I was in a meeting, talking about profits and investments, while the shelter was burning. I never forgave myself for that. The silence that followed was dense. The fire in the fireplace seemed to diminish, as if the flame itself felt the weight of that memory. "After that," he continued, "I abandoned everything. I closed the shelter, left the city, and started living on the streets. I thought God had given up on me." I looked at him, my heart torn between compassion and pain. "And it was there, in the streets, that you found me," I whispered. He smiled sadly. "No, Naomi. It was there that God found me, through you." His words echoed like a wave. "You think you were the one who gave me the bread," he said, "but it was He who sent you. That night saved me. It was the sign I asked for. And when I woke up the next morning, I knew what I needed to do." I was confused. "Do what?" He stepped forward, his voice low and firm. "Rebuild the shelter. And start with you." The air seemed to vibrate between us. I could hardly believe it. You mean the Collins shelter is going to reopen?" He nodded. "But this time, it will be different. It will be a haven for faith. A place where no one will feel invisible anymore." I felt tears stinging. "Henry, it's beautiful. But why me?" He smiled slightly. Because I owe you everything. And because I want you to be the one to take care of the shelter. In my name. Me? I asked, incredulous. But I don't even know how to manage anything. I only know how to survive. He shook his head. Precisely for that reason. Because whoever has felt the pain of hunger knows the value of sharing bread. His words pierced my soul. I stood there in silence, trying to grasp the magnitude of it all. Henry looked at me with a tenderness that seemed paternal. God doesn't choose the prepared, Naomi. He prepares the chosen. That phrase kept echoing. And then, for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. True peace. But there was still something that bothered me. Henry, you said you needed to disappear to understand what was happening. What did you mean by that? He sighed and went to the desk. He picked up a folder, opened it, and took out some documents. This will help you understand. He handed me a sheet of paper. It was a medical report. At the top, it read, St. Luke's Hospital, diagnosis, end-stage heart disease. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. No, I murmured. He nodded slowly. I found out 2 months ago. The doctors said I don't have much time left. And when I heard that, I decided to give myself over to the streets. I wanted to know what it's like to lose everything before returning to God. Pain overwhelmed me completely. Henry, you can't give up now. You have so much to live for. He smiled serenely. I've already lived everything I needed to. Now, I want to use the time I have left to fulfill the purpose I was given. He came closer, took my hands, and looked into my eyes. I don't want you to cry. I want you to promise something. What? I asked, my voice almost fading. That you'll continue to run the shelter even after I'm gone. Tears streamed freely. Don't talk like that, please. He squeezed my hands tightly. Promise me, Naomi. Because this shelter is more than bricks. It's living faith. And you're the one who taught me that. It took me a while to answer, but finally I murmured, I promise. He smiled, and the gleam in his eyes was the same as the golden coin. Then now I can rest. The sound of distant thunder echoed, and the fire in the fireplace flickered for a moment. Henry looked out the window, thoughtful. You know, sometimes I think God speaks through the storms, and that He's sending me one last message. What message? I asked. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. That it's time to go home. Before I could answer, the sound of breaking glass echoed down the hallway. The clerk screamed. Henry turned sharply, his face pale. Stay here, Naomi. And he ran toward the sound. I ran after him, but he had already disappeared down the dark hallway. The wind rushed in through the broken window, making the curtains flutter like ghosts. I shouted his name, but only the echo answered. On the ground, a gold coin spun by itself until it stopped right in front of my feet. And that's when I realized the reunion wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new goodbye. I ran through the dark corridors of the mansion, calling his name, but only the wind answered me. The sound of the curtains flapping and the thunder outside mingled with the racing beat of my heart. Henry! I shouted again, but it was as if the world had swallowed his voice. When I reached the main hall, the window was open, raindrops streaming in and trickling down the marble floor. I looked outside, but saw only the dark garden, illuminated by lightning. No sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I felt a deep anguish. A part of me told me that this was more than just a disappearance. It was a sign. I picked up the coin that was on the floor and squeezed it tightly. God, what's happening? Why did you bring me here? I murmured. Before despair could take hold, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, ready to run. But it was Robert, the driver. He was soaked, breathless, and carrying an envelope. He asked me to deliver this, miss. I picked up the envelope, trembling. Where is he? Robert lowered his eyes. He's gone. Got where? I asked, my voice breaking. He only said that the next step is in your hands. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and a folded document. I started reading, and my legs gave way before I reached the end of the first line. It was a will. I, Henry James Collins, declare that all my assets, property, and shares be transferred to Naomi Grace Turner, the young woman who restored my faith and my life. I felt the air leave my lungs. I read and reread the words, unable to believe them. Robert watched me in silence, respectfully, while I let the tears fall. This can't be real. But it was. His signature was there, firm, unmistakable. Henry had left everything to me, a girl who didn't even have a decent pair of shoes, now the heiress to the largest fortune in the city. I tried to speak, but no words came out. Robert put his hand on my shoulder. He knew what he was doing, miss. He said that money would only have meaning if it was used with the same love with which you gave that loaf of bread. I closed my eyes, and the scene from that cold night returned like a film. Me, the snow, the bread, his gaze. Now everything made sense. The simplest act of my life had changed the destiny of 2 souls. But my heart still ached. And where did he go? I insisted. Robert hesitated. He asked me not to say. He only gave me this. And he held out a small, aged wooden box. I picked it up carefully. The latch opened with a soft click. Inside, there was something unexpected, the gold coin, but it wasn't the same one. This one had a new symbol engraved in the center, a heart surrounded by wings. Below, an inscription in Latin, "Love conquers all things." I didn't understand much Latin, but the word sounded familiar, and Robert whispered, "It means, love conquers all." The tears fell without resistance. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He knew I would doubt, that I would want to give up. Robert nodded. And that's why he left what he believed in most in your hands. I looked around, trying to absorb the reality. The gilded hall, the paintings, the furniture, it all belonged to me now. But the emptiness I felt was greater than any wealth. I ran my fingers over the coin and remembered the shelter. Collins' shelter. It was as if I could hear Henry's voice inside my mind. Rebuild what was lost. That's when I understood. The money, the house, the will, none of that was about me. It was about the purpose, about transforming pain into hope, about continuing what he started. The next morning, I returned to the shelter. The sun rose timidly between the clouds, and the broken windows reflected the golden light like promises. I went inside and knelt on the dusty floor. Lord, if you have brought me this far, give me the wisdom not to fail. I felt the air change around me. A light breeze swept through the hall, and for a moment, I swear I heard Henry's voice, calm, soft, like an echo. You were never alone. I spent the next few days organizing papers, cleaning, and calling for volunteers. The news spread quickly. The homeless girl who inherited Henry Collins' fortune. The newspapers, the TV channels, everyone wanted to know my story. But I only wanted one thing, to reopen the doors of the shelter. To transform that place into a beacon for those who lived in darkness. And every time exhaustion made me doubt, I looked at the silver cross and remembered, faith restores all. Over time, people began to show up. Some brought donations, others just wanted to help. And among them, a lady named Margaret. She, with kind eyes, told me something I'll never forget. When God gives a mission, He also sends the right angels to fulfill it. While I was praying, a drop fell to the floor. It was water, pure and cold, coming from a crack in the ceiling. I looked up and realized something incredible. The rain outside had stopped, but the sound of the water was constant, as if it were coming from inside the walls. I followed the sound until I found a small opening behind the cross. Inside, an iron compartment contained an envelope wrapped in cloth. I opened it and found another letter, different from the previous ones. Daughter, the shelter is yours now. But the mission is bigger than rebuilding walls. You need to rebuild lives, starting with your own. The fire destroyed what was old so that the new could be born. The tears returned. Dad, I promise. I held the letter against my chest and closed my eyes. But suddenly a sound made me shudder. A dry crack, coming from the ceiling. The wood creaked loudly. Then another. And then, dust began to fall. I looked up and realized the structure was collapsing. The entire shelter was shaking. I ran out of the room, carrying the box of letters in my arms. The sound of cracking beams filled the air. Behind me, room 3 collapsed in flames. The fire had returned. But this time, I felt no fear. I knew it wasn't destruction. It was rebirth. And amidst the smoke, I saw that golden light again, intense, vibrant, pulsating, as if heaven itself had descended to illuminate what was yet to come. When the bedroom ceiling collapsed, the sound was deafening. Smoke covered everything, and the heat from the flames burned the air around me. I ran, clutching the box with Henry's letters to my chest, without thinking, simply obeying that silent voice inside me. "Run, daughter, run!" I left the shelter breathless, stumbling on the broken steps. Night had grown dark again, but there was something strange in the sky, a golden glow among the clouds, as if fire had reached the firmament. The wind blew strongly, scattering sparks through the air. I fell to my knees on the sidewalk, coughing, trying to catch my breath. Behind me, the shelter was ablaze, and yet I felt no fear. It was as if God himself were purifying that place once more, cleansing away the pain, the past, and making way for the new. Minutes later, sirens began to blare. Firefighters arrived, and curious people gathered around. Some tried to put out the fire, others helped me to my feet. A man asked, "Is anyone inside?" And I, still in a trance, could only answer, "No. Just memories." As the flames devoured what remained of the shelter, I stared intently at the golden symbol atop the cross, now visible through the flames. It seemed to glow with its own living power, as if something sacred were being revealed there. When it was all over, and the fire finally went out, only one wall remained standing. The same one from room 3. I went there, guided by something I can't even explain. I touched the hot ashes and realized, behind them, something was intact. I pushed through the rubble and found a metal plate, covered in soot. I cleaned it with my hands, and little by little the letters appeared. Love never fails. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 8. My heart was filled with peace. It was as if Henry had left that verse as the final seal of the promise. The following day, the newspaper ran the headline, "Fire hits shelter under reconstruction. Survivor claims to see miracle in the flames." The news spread, and within a few days, people began to show up. Not to lament, but to help. Trucks arrived carrying wood, cement, and bricks. Men and women I had never seen before. All saying the same thing, "I saw your story, Naomi. God sent me here." And, one by one, they began to erect the new walls of the shelter. It was as if Henry's miracle was multiplying. Each brick laid was a prayer. Each smile, a rebirth. I looked around and saw people of all ages, from all walks of life, united by something greater. Among them, one face caught my attention, that of Margaret. The lady who had helped me earlier was holding a basket of warm bread. "I brought it to feed those who work." "That's how it all started, wasn't it?" she said with a smile. I hugged her tightly. "Yes, it was with bread. And with faith." She laughed. "Well then, let's nourish both body and spirit." And so we did. That day marked the rebirth not only of the shelter, but of all of us. In the late afternoon, I sat on the step of the new entrance, watching the sunset paint the sky golden. The voices of people working echoed behind me, and I felt a presence. The same scent. The same warmth. I looked at the horizon and murmured, "Dad, you did it. The shelter lives on." And for a brief moment, I swear I saw a silhouette in the sunlight, Henry, smiling, hat in hand, watching. I closed my eyes and let the tears fall, but this time they were tears of gratitude. That man, whom I had once considered just a stranger, now lived in every wall erected, in every loaf of bread shared, in every prayer said in that place. Weeks passed, and the new shelter, now called Project Naomi, was finished. It had dormitories, a refectory, a chapel, and even a small bakery. "The bread that saved one life will now feed many," I told visitors. At the inauguration, the hall was full. Ordinary people, entire families, pastors, volunteers. And, in the midst of it all, there I was, in the simple dress a lady from the church had given me, trying to contain my emotion. I climbed onto the small, makeshift stage and looked at the crowd. It all started with a piece of bread, and with the certainty that God does not forget His children. People applauded, some cried. Today, This shelter doesn't belong to me, nor to Henry Collins. It belongs to all of us. Because God's love is the only thing that isn't lost in the fire. The audience rose and prayed with me, in reverent silence. After the event, I went to the chapel. On the altar, I placed the silver cross and the gold coin. They both gleamed in the candlelight, as if they were conversing with each other. I knelt and prayed. Lord, thank you for showing me that love doesn't die. It only changes form. That's when I heard the sound of soft footsteps. I opened my eyes and saw a small boy, maybe 8 years old, standing in the doorway. Simple clothes, a curious look. "Hi," he said. "Are you the bread lady?" I smiled. "Yes, I am." "How do you know that?" He pointed to the cross and replied, "The man with the hat told me. He told me to come here when I was hungry." My heart raced. "The young man with the hat?" I asked, my voice trembling. He nodded. He said there will always be hot bread for those who believe. The tears came without warning. I took a loaf of bread fresh from the oven and handed it to him. "You can eat it, dear. And never forget, God always provides." The boy smiled, took a bite, and before leaving, placed something on the altar. It was a gold coin. The same one. Exactly the same. I froze. "Boy!" I called. I ran to the door, but he was already gone. Only the echo of his footsteps and the familiar scent lingered in the air. I returned to the chapel slowly, my heart ablaze. The coin gleamed in the candlelight. I picked it up and noticed something engraved on the back. A new inscription, one that hadn't been there before: "Bread returns to those who share it." My legs felt weak. I looked at the cross, and its brilliance seemed even stronger. I understood in that instant that the miracle didn't end with me. It multiplied, in every gesture, in every person touched by love. That night, I sat alone in the shelter, watching the hall begin to come alive again. Hanging on the wall, old photos of Henry and his wife seemed to smile at me. I felt a gentle presence, as if the very air was filled with peace. I took the coin and held it against my chest. "I did it, Henry. The shelter will be reborn." Tears fell, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. I finally understood why it had all happened. But then, something happened. A shadow passed by the window, quick and silent. I jumped up, startled, and went to it, but there was no one there. Just a mark in the dust on the glass, the impression of a hand. I felt a chill. I went back to the center of the room and saw that the Bible on the table was open, even though I had left it closed. The page displayed an underlined verse: "Behold, I make all things new." My heart raced. "Henry," I murmured, looking around. No answer, just the distant sound of the wind. But the scent, the same scent of his cologne, filled the air. I picked up the silver cross and sat down. Fear mingled with faith. It was as if he were there, invisible, guiding my every step. And then, without realizing it, I began to pray aloud, giving thanks. Suddenly, a noise coming from the hallway made me get up. Light footsteps. I went to the door and stopped. Outside, on a chair, was a new envelope. My name was handwritten. Trembling, I opened it. Inside, just one sentence: "You haven't discovered everything yet, Naomi. Look on the wall of room 3. I looked around, my heart racing. The shelter was large, with dozens of old doors. I walked to room 3, the same one where Henry had slept the night of the fire, years ago. The wall was covered in soot. I ran my hand over it and felt something engraved there. Letters. The flashlight's light revealed an almost faded inscription: "Truth resides in the fire." At that moment, the wind blew strongly, the candle went out, and the shelter was plunged into darkness. And that's when I realized the legacy Henry had left me wasn't just made of gold and bricks. It was made of secrets. That phrase on the wall kept burning inside my mind: "Truth resides in the fire." I touched the letters with my fingers, feeling the roughness of the old soot. It was as if the words had been written hastily, in desperation, perhaps by Henry himself. But what did he want me to discover there? The darkness inside the shelter was total. I lit a candle and observed the small room. The burnt walls still bore the marks of the fire, memories frozen in time. The smell of old wood and ash seemed to whisper stories the world had forgotten. I knelt on the floor and tapped my knuckles on the boards. A hollow sound answered. Something was hidden there. I searched for a tool among the old things in the shelter and found a rusty iron bar. With effort, I began to lift the floorboards. The wood gave way, revealing a small metal box, covered in ash and rust. My heart raced. I cleaned the lid and saw an inscription engraved on it, "For when faith is reborn." His hands were trembling. I knew it was coming from him. I opened it slowly. Inside, there was a stack of yellowed letters, a small leather-bound notebook, and an old photograph. The candlelight flickered, as if it wanted to see too. I picked up the photo first. It was a younger Henry, next to a smiling woman and a little girl. Behind the photo, a date, 1999, and a handwritten sentence, "Our miracle, Grace." The name struck me like a bolt of lightning. Grace. The same middle name my mother gave me. Naomi Grace Turner. I felt a chill. I opened the notebook with trembling hands. The first pages were Henry's notes about the shelter, lists of donations, names, biblical sermons. But on the last pages, the handwriting changed. The letters seemed shaky, emotional. If someone ever finds this, let them know, God never makes mistakes in connections. Everything we lose is returned in mysterious ways. And sometimes, what we thought was destroyed in the fire was merely purified by it. I turned the page. There was more. My daughter would be her age today. If she had survived the fire. The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. My whole body went cold. And why daughter? The girl in the photo. I looked again. The child had my eyes. I tried to breathe, but no air came in. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I picked up the photo and held it up to the candle. The resemblance was undeniable. The same hair, the same eyes. And suddenly, everything started to make sense. Henry wasn't just a man I had helped. He was something much closer. He was my father. The revelation hit me like an avalanche. I fell to my knees, clutching the photo to my chest. The tears came silently, hot, endless. My God! Did he know? I whispered. I opened one of the letters. The handwriting was shaky, as if he had written it in the last few days. Naomi, if you are reading this, it is because you have found what the fire left behind. I didn't know you survived. I spent half my life asking God for forgiveness for losing her. And it was He who brought you back, in the most unlikely way possible. The words, blurred by tears, seemed to throb. I continued reading, my heart broken. I saw you on that street, and something in your eyes reminded me of your mother. It was like seeing the hope I thought I had buried along with the past. When you gave me that bread, it was as if God was saying, "She is alive, and she still believes." I couldn't hold back the tears. Memories of my childhood, so confused, began to return. Fragments. A smell of smoke. Shouts. Strong hands carrying me out. Then, silence. An orphanage. Oblivion. Suddenly, I understood everything. The fire he mentioned hadn't just killed his wife, it had separated us. I was the lost daughter he believed had died. I dropped the letter on the floor and stayed there, kneeling, my body trembling. Father. The word came out weakly, almost a whisper. And then, something inexplicable happened. The candle flame flickered, but did not go out. Instead, it grew larger, as if the air around me had filled with warmth. A gentle breeze swept through the room, and I smelled a familiar scent, the same one Henry used to wear. I closed my eyes. A soft, unmistakable voice echoed within me. "I told you we'd see each other again, Naomi." My heart stopped for a second. "Father," I murmured. The tears were no longer of pain, but of something greater, something I couldn't name. Peace, love, miracle. "Don't cry," the voice continued. "I kept my promise. Now it's your turn." I looked at the candle. The flame seemed to dance, alive, as if looking back at me. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked. "Because I needed you to recognize me for who I've become, not for who I was. Forgiveness must be born from truth, not guilt. I closed my eyes tightly. "I forgive you, Father, with all my heart." And in that instant the flame went out, but the room was bathed in a golden light, coming from nowhere. The light was warm, serene, like the sunrise. I looked around and saw the burnt wall glowing faintly, revealing something I hadn't seen before, a metal crucifix embedded in the wall, covered in soot. I touched it with my fingertips, and felt the heat pulsing. It was as if that cross were the last link between heaven and earth. Henry's presence was there. I could feel it. "Thank you, Lord," I whispered, kneeling. "Thank you for giving me back my father, even if only for a moment." Tears fell, but I smiled. Because in that moment, I knew, Henry hadn't left. He had simply become part of the miracle. And when the wind blew gently, extinguishing one of the candles, I heard, very softly, the same voice that had guided me from the beginning. "Keep going, my daughter. There's still plenty of bread to share." That night was unlike any other. The shelter, now teeming with life, seemed to breathe. The smell of fresh bread mingled with the sounds of laughter and prayers. I walked among the tables, observing each face. Men and women who had once known the pain of the streets now had a home. Soft lights reflected on the new walls, and children played near the fireplace. The sound of pots and pans in the kitchen echoed like a song of gratitude. I felt a lump in my throat. Everything that had once been in ruins was now flourishing. The impossible had happened before my eyes. I took the golden coin from the altar and looked at it in the firelight. The inscription, "Bread returns to those who share it." It seemed to shine even brighter. I ran my thumb over the letters and murmured, "Thank you, Lord, for making me understand the true meaning of love." Suddenly, Margaret approached, smiling. "Dinner is almost ready, dear. But I think we have visitors." I glanced toward the door and saw a group of reporters. She winked at me. "This time, the world will hear what God has done here." I smiled, but inside something told me that that night held something even greater. I handed the coin to Margaret and asked, "Keep it for me. It's precious." She nodded and went to attend to the guests. I stood alone for a moment, watching the fire. The flames danced as if telling an ancient story, mine. I could still hear the echo of the cold streets, feel the weight of the stale bread in my hands. And, above all, remember Henry's gaze on that snowy night. I grabbed the makeshift microphone and climbed onto the small stage. The hall fell silent. I took a deep breath and began, "A year ago, I was sleeping on the sidewalks, with nothing but a piece of bread and faith in God. That night, a stranger asked me for help, and I gave him what I had." Some nodded, moved. I continued, "What I didn't know was that this man would be the instrument of a miracle. He taught me that love doesn't depend on what we have, but on what we are capable of giving, even when we have little." The hall filled with applause and tears. Today, this shelter is living proof that God transforms little into much, the lost into found, despair into hope. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I swear, I felt a light breeze brush against my face, as if someone were there, listening, smiling. I stepped down from the stage and walked to the kitchen. The smell of fresh bread enveloped me. Batches came out one after another, and each loaf was distributed with a smile. I remembered when I had nothing to eat and prayed softly, "Lord, may there never be a lack of bread, nor of faith." Margaret came to my side and whispered, "You should see what's happening out there." I went to the door. The street was full, people waiting for food, yes, but also for a word, a hug, a prayer. I called everyone inside. "There's more room in here than you can imagine," I shouted. And somehow, the seemingly small hall expanded with joy. Laughter mingled with prayers. The sound was like a celestial choir. An elderly lady took my hand and said, "Daughter, I lost everything. But when I came in here, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace." I smiled and replied, "Then stay, because peace lives here now." With every glance, I saw Henry. In every smile, in every tear, he was there, not in flesh but in purpose. The miracle hadn't died with him, it had spread like the fire of faith. Later, when the hall finally emptied, I sat alone in the chapel. The cross and the coin remained on the altar. I knelt and closed my eyes. "Father, I have kept my promise. The shelter lives. And so do I." A beautiful silence filled the place. The kind of silence that speaks louder than any sound. I felt a presence. Calm, gentle, familiar. "You've grown up, my daughter." The voice came from within, sweet as the wind. I felt my heart beat faster, but I didn't open my eyes. "I only did what you taught me, Dad." "No," the voice replied. "You did more. You taught the world." Tears were falling. "I miss you." And he, as always, replied wisely, "Missing someone is love's way of remembering that it still exists." Suddenly, I heard footsteps. I opened my eyes and saw the same boy from before, the one with the hat. Only now he was carrying something in his hands, a loaf of bread and a coin. "He told me to return this to you," the boy said, handing them to me. I picked up the two objects and noticed something different. The coin was cold, but the bread, it was hot. Really hot. As if it had just come out of the oven. I looked at the boy, confused. "Who sent this?" "The man who was outside," he replied, pointing to the door. "But he said he couldn't come in. He just came to say he's proud." I ran outside, but the street was empty. The wind blew gently, and the city lights seemed softer. In the sky, a single star shone, golden, solitary, and alive. I felt tears wetting my face, but I smiled. I held the bread in my hands and closed my eyes. "I know it's you, Dad. And I know God let you see." I went back inside and placed the bread on the altar, next to the cross and the coin. It was like closing a cycle, the same gesture that had started it all. Margaret came in slowly and hugged me. "What's wrong, darling?" "Nothing," I replied, smiling through tears. "It's just that today, the bread came back home." She squeezed my hand. And with him, all the hope in the world. I sat in front of the altar and remained there, observing the three relics, the cross, the coin, and the bread. 3 symbols of faith, love, and new beginnings. All that remained, and all that truly mattered. I looked at the sky through the window and murmured, "The bread of life is eternal." And in that instant I felt, not just the smell of bread, but the living presence of God, filling every corner of the shelter, every soul, every beat of my heart. Hope had returned. And this time, it would never leave again. Sometimes, God chooses the most unlikely paths to reveal the greatest miracles. Who would have thought that a homeless girl, with a piece of bread in her hands and faith in her heart, would be used by him to transform an entire city? Naomi not only found the father she thought she had lost, but also discovered the purpose that gives meaning to life, to love, even when it hurts, to give, even when there is a lack, and to believe, even when everything seems to fall apart. Her story is about the power of simple faith. About how a small gesture, a loaf of bread, a word, a prayer, can multiply to touch thousands of hearts. And perhaps upon hearing the story, you too will remember something. That moment when God asked you to do something that seemed too small, but which, deep down, had the power to change everything. Naomi's miracle wasn't the money, nor the rebuilt shelter. The true miracle was the transformation, of her, of Henry, and of all who crossed that path of faith. So, I ask you, have you ever felt God calling you to something simple, yet profound? Have you ever thought about how many lives could be touched by a single gesture from you? Naomi's bread multiplied because she didn't keep the little she had for herself. And perhaps your bread, your time, your talent, your forgiveness, is the miracle someone is waiting for today. Never underestimate the power of an act of love. Never doubt what God can do with the little you have. And above all, never lose faith. Because God's love never fails, never fades, and never forgets those who share what they have. Before I finish, I want to do what Naomi would do. May God bless your life with health, light, wisdom, and peace. May He strengthen your faith and multiply all that you offer with love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it, because stories of faith need to be told, and miracles need to be remembered. The bread that Naomi gave saved a life. The bread that Henry left behind saved many. And the bread you offer today could save the world.